This is my last time. Tomorrow I'm going into silence, retreat. No more speaking.
You will always
So, I want to reflect with you about two things. One is what is called perspective. Perspective and experience. Okay? The two of them are connected. So, in 1992, in Santo Domingo, they were celebrating the 500th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. Do you know that? In 1492, Columbus reached the island of Santo Domingo, and that was the discovery of America. Okay? So 500 years later, they were celebrating the 500th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. But the indigenous people, the original people of the island who have been there for more than 500 years, they said, who said Columbus discovered America? Columbus thought he had reached India. We discovered Columbus. He was walking around on our shores thinking that he had discovered America. Well, actually, we discovered him over there. So what are you celebrating? Columbus discovering America, or we discovering Columbus and receiving in return from Columbus all our wealth being stolen from us and all the diseases of Western Europe coming to us? What are you celebrating? No? Can you understand what this means?
Yeah.
Whose perspective? Whose perspective?
People's
Whose experience? Can you understand the difference?
Yeah.
So every time you always think in terms of Napoleon was a great soldier, Napoleon could do nothing without his soldiers, foot soldiers.
True.
Whose perspective? The soldier's perspective or Napoleon's perspective? One of my favorite stories, my favorite movies is about Patton, the American general. Patton said, no one ever won a war by dying for his country. He won the war by making the other fellow die for his country. Can you understand perspective? Whose perspective? Okay? So Catholic social teaching, whose perspective?
Our perspective.
This is Vatican perspective, a global perspective from Europe. It's not, because it's not our experience. So if you really want to get a perspective, you have to experience that and then begin to get your perspective. In tourism, I was saying, whose perspective? Whose perspective? The perspective of the victims, those who suffer in the third world, or the perspective of those who send out tours in Europe. So, whose perspective? The migrant's perspective, the victim's perspective, or the perspective of the people of origin? So, you've got origin and destination. Is that clear enough? So, whose perspective? The perspective of the people of the origin, or the perspective of the people of the destination? So, the destination is where the victims are, the people who come from outside are the people of the origin. One more example. This is from my own hometown in Goa. I like to give this example because it's close to home, right? And it's very important for people like Ishwanti and Mali. My state is a very beautiful state. It's full of hills and rivers and seas. It's very beautiful. Even though I never grew up over there, and I grew up outside, when I came back I said, this is really a very beautiful place, all right? So we have the sea and a lot of fishing. And so if this is the sea, then you have a boat here. I fought at one time for the fishermen. So you have this boat. I went out on the boat with those fishermen at one time, many years ago when I was much younger. It's a horrible experience for somebody like me, who's never been on a boat, to be rocked so much. I came back and I was vomiting and vomiting because the boat was a small boat and it rocked so much. And while I was on the boat, I thought it's safer to jump into the sea than to stay over here, I'm worried about my survival on that boat. That's my experience, that I'm worried about how to survive on that boat. I want to get off that boat at all costs. All right? So if I'm on the boat, that's my experience and that's my perspective. Can you follow what I'm saying? But if I'm standing here on the shore and on a safe place, and I say, oh, what a beautiful boat. I wonder what it's like to go boating. Must be nice to go boating. No experience of going on the boat. Therefore, I have a completely different perspective, all right? Then, if I'm up here on top of the hill, and I look out at the sea, oh, how beautiful. Let's praise God for the beauty of creation. I see some small little thing. I don't know what it is, boat, or whether those people are struggling. I don't even know whether they are human. I don't even know whether it's a boat. What is my experience? And therefore, what's my perspective? Okay? Suppose I'm on this side, behind the hill. What boat are you talking about? What waves? I don't know what you all are talking about. No experience, no perspective. Want to know why the bishops are not? Because their closeness to the actual reality. That's what we try to do on the exposure immersion process. So the people's perspective is what's your experience and then what's your perspective. So what's your experience with struggling women and therefore what's your perspective? And why are you so committed to it? Mali, what's your experience? Good church. But the experience is not so good. These people keep changing. Some fellow sitting there in a bishop's house decides, IMCS out. Out it goes. No? That's your experience. Now, what perspective will he have? So that is the real problem. I'm trying to say that if you really want to get Catholic social teaching from a people's perspective, then you have to get the experience of the people who suffer. So that is central. The struggle, experience. At one time, many years ago, I fought for the fishermen. And so all of us, about 40 of us, were put into prison in Goa. The prison in Goa is a very nice place. I slept for 11 hours a day there in the prison. And my poor parents thought that they were torturing me. And when I came out, I'm fresh and they are worried. They said, we thought you were being tortured. I said, what torture? I slept for 11 hours. My mother says, you got to go to prison to sleep. Okay, so that's the problem. That's the struggle. So I enjoyed my time, the 5 days that I got in prison. But we were 40 of us, and there was only one toilet. And the toilet had no door. So it's all open. So I'm sitting in the toilet, and one of the fishermen came and said, Father, you're over there. Okay, I'll come later, to the toilet. So I told my nephews and nieces all this story. They were so tickled with this story. They went to school and told their friends. Their friends all came to see this uncle who was sitting in the toilet, and the fisherman came. That's their experience, all right? That's my experience, very different from theirs. My experience. Can you understand what I'm saying? Therefore, my perspective is very different. It wasn't so wonderful when you're sitting in the toilet and having somebody come and see, oh, you're over there. Okay, That's not so great an experience. So Catholic social teaching has to grow from people's struggle upwards. Okay? So you get involved with migrants, you get involved with the victims of tourism. The Church of the Poor that I spoke about, remember Bishop Dupont? I said we had in the Philippines the Church of the Poor with urban workers. Then in Macau we had the Church of the Poor with migrants from China. In Korea, ISA 3, the Church of the Poor with slum dwellers. ISA 4, the Church of the Poor with victims of tourism. Can you understand what that means? So each time we are looking at reality through the eyes of the victims, those who struggle. And so from there then we begin to say what is Catholic social teaching. But Catholic social teaching doesn't come that way. What you have in the book doesn't come that way. It comes the opposite way. It comes from top down. So what are the problems of Europe? 1848. Anybody knows what happened in 1848? A guy called Karl Marx brought out the Communist Manifesto as the response to the Industrial Revolution. 1891, how many years later? Hey, come on, hurry up.
43.
1891, yeah. 43 years later, the first social encyclical came out, Rerum Novarum. So 43 years later, the church responded. Do you remember that story I told at the end of my talk about the 4 Indians who were struggling, who were chatting there, and then the train was leaving, and the 3 fellows jumped into the train. The last fellow is laughing, saying that I was the fellow who had to go in the train. They came to see me off. That's exactly what happens in the church, no? So the problem is a European problem. It's the problem of the effects of the Industrial Revolution. So you'll have Rerum Novarum, on the Workers' Charter. 1931, it was the rise of Nazism and of communism. So the popes at that time thought that Italian fascism as a state was better than communist Russia. So the Pope said maybe we should have the ideal state as the Italian state. Made one horrible mistake over there, no? But he said he didn't want an anti-God state, so that's why he wrote in 1931, 30 years later, that's the name of the encyclical. 40 years later. But then 1961, Pope John the 23rd wrote his encyclical on Mater et Magistra, Church as Mother and Teacher. Now the world was becoming one. All right. So the problems of the world and the problems of agriculture. So at that time was the time I was studying as a seminarian. And the one section in it was about agriculture as a depressed sector. And so that's why I raised that question to my teacher. I said, if 82% of the people in India live in the village, in that time live in the rural areas, how come that the very ones who produce the food are the very ones who are starving? I didn't know the structures of sin and how in India up till today, the food is rotting, and 30 miles away from the godowns where the food is rotting and where the rats are eating the food, there are people starving with no food. And the local government and the central government are discussing who will pay to take the food to those people. That's what the structures of sin are about.
You remember what the Supreme Court said?
So that some of the people made a case against the Prime Minister. You are responsible. Food is rotting over there. People are starving 30 miles away. Why can't the food be taken that way? So you understand what the structures of sin are about. All right. Then 1971. This is my favorite encyclical, Pope Paul VI.
1967.
No, this was that's another line. This is all about the human work. This is all about human work. So, 1971, Pope Paul VI wrote a beautiful encyclical, my favorite encyclical. 70 years later, Octogesimo Adveniens was 1971. 1981,
What's that?
Octogesimo, 80 years later.
In English.
In English, it's called.
It is
80 years, 70 years later, it's called A Call to Action. That's what it's called. A Call to Action. The most beautiful encyclical that any pope has written. So this is 1981. Then 1991, 100 years later, this is after the fall of the Soviet Union. So this is all about human work. Okay? Then you have another one about human development. 1967, what? Hey, are you sleeping? 87 and 2009. It should have been 2007.
Yes.
But you've got on human development. So human work, human development, and then human world. You have 1963, Pope John the 23rd, Pacem in Terris, peace on earth. Okay? And then 1995, the Gospel of Life, Pope John Paul II. So these are the three main streams, but it comes top down. No? Can you follow what I'm saying? It comes from the popes whose experience is of Europe and whose perspective is global. So what happens in Europe happens all over the world. No, it doesn't happen. Not that way.
1980 Laborum Excelsis.
Yes, 1981. 1981.
1981.
Yeah. So it's all 10 years. Yeah. So it's the Catholic social teaching is about human work, human world, human development. Okay? In between that you have in 1971 also justice in the world. This was the Synod of Bishops. 1971. So you have, and then the document of the Church in the Modern World, 1965. These are all part of the thing. Why do you think the book is more than 600 pages? Because I've done all those.
The last one, what is it? Human what? Human development?
Human world.
Human world.
World.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
WRLD.
Yeah.
So this is 1963 and 1995.
So what is it?
Evangelium Vitae,
Gospel
of Life, and that one was Peace on Earth, Pacem in Terris. So all these encyclicals are written from the perspective of the church in Europe, whose experiences of Europe for the whole world. What we have to do is to do it the opposite way. We have to get our own experience over here and then begin to rewrite the social encyclicals, and you will come to the same conclusions. If you believe in the dignity of the human person, the sacredness of the family, the importance of work, all these things, you'll come to the same conclusions. So, what I'm trying to say to you is, if you want a people's perspective, start doing something and then go to the encyclicals. Don't start with the encyclicals and then start doing something. You'll never do anything. You'll be stuck with the encyclicals. In the Philippines, what was it, 1988, we had the first ISA, Asian Institute for Social Action for Urban Workers. And I was giving the theological reflection from the encyclicals. I said, in 1891, the Pope said that workers have a right to a just wage. Workers have a right to strike. Workers have a right to form unions. And one of the workers said, Father, you got your date wrong. You mean 1981? I said, no, 1891. 1891. We never heard all this. I said, nobody will tell you about it because the priests and the bishops will have to practice it. So it's better not to say anything about it. But if anything to do with sexual ethics comes out, humane vitae, immediately the priests will be preaching all this. They don't have to bother to practice it. This, they'll have to practice it. So better not say anything about it. It will remain a best kept secret in the church. So, all the time, this good news to the workers, this good news to the people has been hidden for 120 years. It's about time you all at least began to look at it. All right? Let me close with my last story. There's a Dominican bishop in the Philippines, Archbishop Legazpi. He and I were great friends, you know. But Legazpi, like every Dominican, started from first principles, top down. And everything was very well ordered. And I start the opposite side, you know, from bottom up. And Legazpi used to say, you know, Desmond, I disagree with everything that you say, but I like to hear what you say because it's different, you know. So I always tell the story of Pope John the 23rd. Pope John the 23rd, they say, met a priest who told him, you know, my predecessor was such a great man in the parish. I'm an ordinary man. I can't do anything like him. So what advice would you give me? John the 23rd said, oh, I know that very well. Pius the 12th was such a great man. He wrote 46 encyclicals. He tried to change the church from top down. I'm an ordinary guy. So you should do what I do. He said, whenever I have to make a decision, I think, what would Pius the 12th do? And I do the opposite thing. So that's the way. Bindu's looking at me. I do the opposite thing, so I start from the bottom up. And that's the way you'll have to go about it. So you don't start reading the encyclicals and studying the encyclicals. You start getting involved and then study the encyclicals. Then you'll find things that are helpful. And you will make social teaching. In my book I have the social teaching of the Asian bishops. So from 1970 onwards, the Asian bishops have also given social teaching. You'll have the social teachings of your own Korean bishops on different things. You have the social teachings of the Latin American bishops, all this. Don't start with the social teachings. Unfortunately, I started with that. But you have to get involved. Then begin to look at what in the social teachings is valid for you. Because the experience and the perspective is a European perspective, European experience from the perspective of Rome. Thank you.